Hurricane Irma update. As Irma shifts west, powerful winds batter Florida. Updated at 11:50 p.m. ET on Saturday. After battering Cuba on Saturday morning, the eye of Hurricane Irma has its sights set on Florida as a Category 3 storm with maximum sustained winds of 120 miles per hour, a slight slowdown from a few hours ago, according to the National Hurricane Center. The NHC's latest forecast shows the storm center shifting west from Miami, and even Tampa, to Target Street. Petersburg, Florida braces for direct hit. More than 76,000 people are without power, Florida Gov. Rick Scott said at a 6:20 p.m. press conference Saturday, a number that had more than tripled since the update he gave this morning. It's going to get worse, he added. By 11 p.m., FPL, a primary energy provider in Florida, had logged more than 196,000 power outages across the state, with more than 106,000 outages just in Miami-Dade County. This is a deadly storm, and our state has never seen anything like it, Scott said in a 9:30 a.m. press conference. Millions of Floridians will see major hurricane impacts with deadly storm surge and life-threatening winds. The governor says he plans to stay in Tallahassee tonight, but hopes to visit the Florida Keys as possible. On Saturday evening, Irma lingered over the northern coast of Cuba, about 90 miles southeast of Key West, Florida, and moving at 6 miles per hour, according to the NHC. Major hurricane force winds are expected over the Florida Keys at daybreak, according to the NHC advisory. Forecasters say that as Irma moves over the warm waters off Florida's coast, it will strengthen. Conditions in Florida will continue to get much worse by late tonight through Sunday afternoon, the National Weather Center Miami tweeted Saturday. The storm is expected to move northwest, says Michael Brennan, senior hurricane specialist at the NHC. That's going to take the core of the hurricane up or just onshore of the west coast of Florida during the day on Sunday into Sunday night, Brennan said. But just because the storm is tracking westward does not mean Florida's east coast is in the clear. A state of emergency remains in effect for all 67 of Florida's counties. On Saturday, President Trump and his cabinet were getting regular updates about the hurricane from Camp David, according to a White House official. Storm surge. Although Irma's winds could cause major damage to structures and power lines, officials say the amount of water they could bring ashore is one of the biggest risks. Residents of the British Virgin Islands say they have witnessed scenes of unbelievable devastation caused by Hurricane Irma, and warned of widespread looting and a shortage of water and shelter for those left homeless by the storm. Irma severed links with the outside world and left thousands of tourists and local people desperate to escape after it pounded islands along the northeastern edge of the Caribbean. Live Hurricane Irma. Life-threatening storm surge expected in the Florida Keys. Latest updates. 200 km/h winds in Cuba. Hurricane gust recorded in Florida Keys. Sheriff asks people not to shoot at Irma. Read more. However, the islands were spared another battering on Saturday when Hurricane Jose had markedly less impact than first feared. Irma wrought extensive damage after it hit the isolated islands of St. Bart's, St. Martin, Anguilla and the British and the Virgin Islands group, leaving 22 people dead. We are all safe but in a state of shock, said Natalie Drury, a resident of the British Virgin Islands. We desperately need help as soon as possible. Food, water, shelter. I'm extremely concerned about health and safety. There is sewage absolutely everywhere. Drury, who lives with her husband on Tortola, the biggest and most populous of the British Virgin Islands, told The Guardian she was in a state of disbelief about the destruction she has witnessed. I can't believe my eyes. I can't even begin to describe the utter devastation around. It feels like nothing is left, she said, adding that only concrete buildings, some of them badly damaged, were still standing. It's worse than anyone could have imagined. The country is going to need serious help. I have no idea how many people have died. We were told yesterday it's gone up to 10, but obviously that's all rumors. Nobody knows yet. The house in which Drury and her husband have sought shelter has no phone or Wi-Fi connections. The couple were hoping to return to their home, which they had not seen since Irma hit the island, and check on their neighbors. We will grab anything of any value as looting has already begun, Drury said. The town has been emptied, Every shop has been looted. She and her husband are staying in another house that has become a place of refuge for several people who have lost everything. We now have 11 people, 1 baby and 7 dogs, Drury said. The pleas for relief came amid criticism of the British government's response to the disaster. On Saturday, the Foreign Secretary, Boris Johnson, announced a package of £42 million, $55 million, for the relief effort in the British territories of Anguilla, British Virgin Islands and Turks and Caicos. The UK government is doing everything it possibly can to help those affected by the hurricane, Johnson said. About 500 British troops have been sent to the area of the Caribbean hit by Irma, with the Defense Secretary, Michael Fallon, saying that the relief operation was well underway. Marines, engineers, medics and specialists, including Army and RAF personnel, have been deployed in the region. The area endured more high winds on Saturday as Jose, a Category 4 storm, passed through, closing airports and halting emergency relief efforts by boat. However, France's meteorological agency said on Sunday that Jose had markedly less of an impact on the French islands of Saint Martin and Saint Barts than anticipated. Advertisement. The agency had issued its highest warning, saying the Category 4 Hurricane Jose could become a dangerous event of exceptional intensity. But there's not a cloud in the sky, one AFP reporter at the scene said. Thanks to a passage which was further away than anticipated, the effects on the territory were markedly less, the meteorological agency said. The U.S. National Hurricane Center had warned on Saturday that Jose was nearing Category 5 strength, the highest rating for a storm, bringing fears of more destruction for islands in the eastern Caribbean such as Barbuda, the British Virgin Islands and Anguilla days after they had taken the full brunt of Irma. But the forecaster said on Sunday that Joe was gradually weakening as it moved away from the northern Leeward Islands. The government of Antigua discontinued the tropical storm warning for Barbuda and Anguilla. First hurricane force winds hit Florida Keys as a weakened Hurricane Irma blows toward Florida mainland. The Florida Keys began to feel the wrath of Hurricane Irma on Saturday night as the powerful storm headed on a collision course with the western coast of Florida, which braced for a potentially devastating day of deadly winds and surging seas. Irma was expected to unleash its full fury of 125 miles per hour winds sometime around sunrise over Key West, barring a sudden change in direction, with the Fort Myers-Naples area in the storm's relentless crosshairs by mid-afternoon. Hurricane force gusts were already blasting the spindly islands of the Keys on Saturday night, while escalating winds, driving rain and isolated tornadoes surged across Florida on the massive storm's leading edge, which on Friday had launched a massive evacuation in anticipation of a direct hit, was breathing easier as the storm tracked west. Yet Irma's 350-mile-wide girth meant the city was still in for 90 miles per hour winds and a storm surge of 3 to 6 feet. Nearly 7 million people were advised to evacuate. Many of those on the west coast were unable to flee because with the storm's change of direction the warning came too late. State transportation officials allowed cars to use the shoulders traveling the bumper-to-bumper highway out of Tampa, in Naples and Fort Myers, where many buildings weren't constructed to withstand the expected storm surge. People fled to crowded shelters by the thousands. The storm is here, Governor Rick Scott said. Hurricane Irma is now impacting our state. This is a deadly storm and the state has never seen anything like it. The massive movement of water onto ordinarily dry land that is expected could have life-threatening consequences, state and federal officials warned. There is a serious threat of significant storm surge flooding along the entire west coast of Florida and this has increased to 15 feet above ground level, Scott said. 15 feet is devastating and will cover your house. The National Weather Service warned that the storm was so large in size that hurricane-force winds could be expected throughout south and central Florida, no matter which side of the state one was on. This is as real as it gets, the service said in a statement. Still, a change in wind direction prevented the storm from intensifying on its approach to Florida as originally had been anticipated, and instead of making landfall as a Category 4 storm, it was anticipated to remain at a Category 3 level, with comparatively slower winds. Landfall on Florida's west coast, possibly near Fort Myers, would bring winds of about 120 miles per hour, the National Weather Service said late Saturday night. Still, people along Florida's western coast spent the day scrambling for shelter. A storm surge warning was in effect Saturday for much of Florida's coast, both eastern and western. The warning had been discontinued north of North Miami Beach to Jupiter Inlet, in NHC's latest advisory. On its current forecast track, there's a real threat of potentially catastrophic and life-threatening storm surge in the Gulf Coast communities of southwest Florida, said Robert Malda with the National Weather Service in Miami on Saturday. Inundation from the storm surge be as much as 15 feet deep in some areas near coast. Gov. Scott reiterated that threat at a noon press conference. There is a serious threat of significant storm surge flooding along the entire west coast of Florida, and this has increased to 15 feet of impact above ground level. Scott noted that residents could be lulled into a false sense of security after the winds die down, but said that is when the storm surge comes. This will cover your house, Scott said. If you've ever watched how storm surge works, it flows in fast, very fast, then it flows out. You will not survive. Time to evacuate narrows. The evacuation window was closing fast Saturday. Scott reiterated the call for residents under an evacuation order to get out immediately. If you have been ordered to evacuate anywhere in the state, you need to leave right now, Scott said at the noon press conference. You are running out of time to make a decision. More than 6.5 million Floridians have been ordered to leave their homes. Scott said that traffic along evacuation routes was moving Saturday afternoon. The National Weather Service Key West tweeted Saturday morning that everybody in the Keys should get out if you can, with a guide to refuges of last resort. Miami-Dade County said that Metrobus was to stop service to evacuation shelters at 2 p.m. Saturday. A complicating factor Saturday was the risk of tornadoes in the southern part of the state. Miami hit by outer Saturday. By Saturday morning, Miami was already being hit by the outer bands of the storm, bringing strong winds and heavy rain. The weather forced NPR's Kirk Siegler to turn back after attempting to report from a Miami shelter. Earlier, he was able to meet with resident Gloria Negron, who along with her dog, Lucky, got into a city shelter. We just have to do our inside there, Negron said. There are too many people and everybody is at the edge. Negron had to spend the night sleeping in a chair, but she is one of the lucky ones. Siegler reports that the shelter has had to turn away others because of overcrowding. Seeking shelter. Scott said there were more than 385 shelters open across the state in every county by Saturday evening. More than 70,000 Floridians have taken shelter, Governor Rick Scott said Sunday evening. Scott put out a call Saturday for 1,000 volunteer nurses to help at special needs shelters. Those interested should email help@florida.gov. Floridians prepare. Other state residents have opted to ride out the storm in their homes. Paul McNamara of Port Street, Lucy tells NPR that his wife's profession, she is a nurse, meant she could not leave work, so they are staying put with their 2 children, ages 1 and 4. We have storm shutters, a generator, a lot of water, food, diapers and probably a large market share of the locally available flashlights, McNamara told NPR. I imagine our shed will be leveled and our fence will disappear, but other than that, we should be scared out of our mind. Meantime, Kyle Mentors of Naples said he got out of town on Tuesday. Wife and dog. We didn't want to risk our lives, and we were able to secure our home quickly thanks to accordion shutters. Leaving behind the life we built in our home was a bit surreal. What keepsakes to save. Manders added that lessons from Hurricane Harvey, a storm that brought rapid flooding, persuaded him to leave. Southeastern U.S. also at risk. As Irma moves over land, it is expected to weaken, but it could still bring heavy winds and rains across the southeast. As AP reports, by early next week, Irma is expected to track into the southeastern United States. Thus, all residents from Georgia through the Carolinas and into Virginia should prepare and monitor the progression of this very dangerous hurricane. Parts of Georgia and South Carolina were under hurricane and storm surge watches Saturday. A state of emergency is in effect in 30 counties in Georgia, and Gov. Nathan Deal has issued a mandatory evacuation order for parts of coastal Chatham County. Most of the city of Savannah fell under a voluntary evacuation Saturday. Meantime, Johnny Kaufman from member station WABE reports that Atlanta residents and others in northern Georgia were preparing to house evacuees from the coast and Florida. Irma batters Cuba. When Irma made landfall in Cuba early Saturday, it was still a Category 5 storm. It tripped across the island nation's northern shores, downing power lines, bending palm trees and sending huge waves crashing over sea walls, reports the Associated Press. CNN reports that conditions were expected to deteriorate into Saturday even as the storm moved away, but it could take a long time before the full extent of the damage is known. Caribbean aftermath. Irma has left devastation across the Caribbean, killing at least 22 people, a number that is expected to grow, leveling basic infrastructure and leaving thousands homeless. Barbuda and the British Virgin Islands are among the worst hit. Paul Exnor, an American citizen in Tortola, the largest of the British Virgin Islands, posted a video plea to Facebook. It is fairly critical that aid in terms of food and water is brought to the island, Exner said Friday night. French, American and British have all been dispatched to the region. Damages from Irma were estimated to be $1.44 billion by Saturday, reports the AP. Said Saturday that Irma has damaged or destroyed nearly 3/4 of St. Martin's homes, leaving the island vulnerable to Hurricane Jose, a Category 4 storm, following in Irma's wake, reports AP. Part of a storm-battered region will unfortunately not be granted much of a reprieve. Jose is out there, and it is actually, unfortunately, affecting some of the same areas in the northeastern Leeward Islands that were hit very hard by Irma just a few days ago, said Brennan of the National Hurricane Center. NPR's Emma Bowman contributed to this report. Near Naples, people waited in an hours-long line to get inside the Germain Arena in Estero, which had become a 7,500-bed shelter. Many of them had avoided such shelters in previous storms and would not have been there Saturday if their neighborhoods hadn't abruptly been evacuated. The evacuation zone grew so large by Saturday morning that even those who had made arrangements to stay in hotels were sent to shelters because the hotels were being evacuated. Staying at home was out of the question for Elizabeth and John Simler, whose house is built on land about 5 feet above sea level on Sanibel Island, with its stilts boosting the home an additional 10 feet. They had prepared, they thought. We had a very fine hotel reservation, said Elizabeth, 57. We did not expect to be in this line, at the shelter. The hotel alerted them only hours before that guests were being turned away. Lou Fusco bailed on his hotel before it could bail on him. They said if there is a forced evacuation, you will have to leave, he said. So I said, if that happens, then where the hell am I going to go? In Miami, residents were worried about what possible 90 miles per hour winds would do to the city. In downtown Miami Beach, Jose Toledo, a 27-year-old sound design engineer, said he was moving out of his 9th-floor apartment along the waterfront because it didn't have shutters. "We're going to stay in my office because it's safer there," he said while emerging for a few last-minute supplies. "The construction down here isn't good. I'm worried about things flying off the buildings, and you've got all these construction sites with loose stuff on the ground. It could be dangerous for sure." About 75,000 people were registered at shelters by Saturday night. As the first heavy winds blew in, there were reports of electrical transformers exploding and downed trees. As of Saturday night, almost 200,000 homes had lost power, and officials have predicted that total outages could reach 4 million before Irma heads into Georgia on Monday. Hurricane warnings were issued along the east and west coasts of Florida, with hurricane watches pending in Georgia and lower South Carolina. Tropical storm watches were declared along the Florida Panhandle and mid-coastal South Carolina. 7 counties in South Florida were under a tornado watch. A full-out warning was issued in the Miami-Dade County area after 2 tornadoes were spotted there. More counties were expected to be added as the initial bans from the storm reached those areas. Several cities, including Miami, were imposing nighttime curfews as the storm approached. Most Central Florida counties planned to do the same Sunday night. Every major airport in Florida was closed with the exception of Tallahassee and Pensacola. Tallahassee planned to shut down Monday. Saturday's urgency was foreshadowed by the damage done to Cuba on Friday and Saturday and other Caribbean islands earlier in the week. The death toll was at least 25. Cuba's meteorological agency reported that Irma came ashore Friday night in central Camagüey province, home to the country's third-largest city, with winds so strong they destroyed measurement instruments. Hurricane-strength winds were later recorded in the northern half of Camagüey. Irma was the first Category 5 hurricane to hit the province in 85 years, according to state media. Damage was reported across the province, the station said, roofs torn off, trees downed and power disconnected. In the province of Holguin, some families took shelter in caves to ride out the storm. Full coverage of Hurricane Irma. No one wants to leave the house. Only silence is interrupted by gusts of wind and rain. Yoni Sanchez, who runs a Havana-based digital news service, 14 Media, tweeted about the situation in Camagüey. Sanchez posted photos of people crowding the streets of Havana to pray. She reported that supplies were running low. Irma was eventually downgraded to Category 3 before it headed for Florida on Saturday. The storm is one of 3 hurricanes cycling through the warm September waters. Hurricane Katia struck the eastern coast of Mexico early Saturday as a Category 1 storm. Luis Felipe Puente, head of Mexico's National Emergency Services Agency, said 2 people were killed by the hurricane, which roared onshore in Veracruz state, belting the region with intense rains and winds. Katia quickly lost strength after hitting land and was downgraded to a minimal tropical storm with winds of about 35 miles per hour. The storm could bring 3 to 6 inches of additional rain to a region with a history of flooding and deadly mudslides. Hurricane Jose continued to churn as a Category 4 storm in the northeast Caribbean. It is expected to affect the islands of St. Martin and St. Barthélemy, but warnings have been lifted for the U.S. and British Virgin Islands. The storm will move north into the Atlantic and not be a factor. Updates, 8:40 p.m. The story was updated with additional details throughout, including a revised forecast of the hurricane's wind speeds. 5 p.m. The story was updated with the latest forecast. 3:35 p.m. The story was updated with information on the new trajectory of the storm, revised forecasts and interviews with Florida residents. 10:15 a.m. The story was updated with an interview with a resident of downtown Miami Beach. 9:50 a.m. The story was updated with details of the damage in Cuba. 9:45 a.m. This story was updated with new storm surge forecasts. 8:20 a.m. This article was updated with revised wind speed forecasts.